Okay. Beautiful. Thank you.
She is in the room. See, that's what this is about.
See you afterwards.
Ysaye, listen, I'm sorry. My child is now 23, and she woke up to Juba. She woke up the whole album every single morning, all the way through. She's 23 and remembers.
Wow.
So yeah, this was in the making. I had to come all the way from New York just to see you. Well, that's just because I live here now.
I told you, the whole Charleston is excited. So
yes.
You got don't worry. You got to do that. But if you want to chill someplace else for a little bit, or you come.
I'm totally fine.
Okay, good.
I want you to have that. We'll talk about it.
Okay.
And of course, I'll be in attendance tomorrow night.
Good.
Okay. I need it. High back, take it. Low back, and get back.
At the University of Virginia. No, 8 years. No, 7 years straight. At the University of Virginia.
Really?
Back in the 80s.
Hey.
Long time ago. I've been a fan.
Tired.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your patience. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Patricia Williams-Lassane, and I have the most exciting, wonderful job in the world as I'm the executive director here at the Avery Research Center. And I know those of you who do know me get tired of me saying it, but I will say it until they come ushering me on out. I mean, hopefully it will be later rather than sooner. Tonight's program is one of those wonderful programs that I would love to take credit for, but I really can't. And neither can my staff. This was actually the brainchild of our beloved Paul Gavrini. Many of you all know Paul in the back. You all know Paul? For those of you who don't know Paul, Paul is a researcher. He does tour guides. He does woodworking. He's a donor to Avery. He's a friend to all in need. And he's a welcome. That was a compliment, a sincere compliment. And he's just an overall wonderful guy. And Paul came to us with this project, the opportunity to host Dr. Ysaye Barnwell. And of course, we were like, oh my God, of course, bring her. Whatever we can do, we want her to come. So she's doing a couple of things while she's in town, but we're just so honored that she's here tonight. I have to say, especially that when I was at Dartmouth in the Upper Valley, and I was a part of a group called SWUB. We called ourselves the Single Women of the Upper Valley. It was sad time in the Upper Valley. All we had was each other and Sweet Honey Rock. And we loved, we were at the Nana's house and Wanting Memories. We were deep. I mean, not as deep as them. And then you came to Dartmouth while I was there, and we were just blown away. So that's my little plug for my experience with Sweet Honey Rock. But now on to yours. So let me just give you a little bit of her background. Dr. Ysaye Barnwell, the only child of a registered nurse and a father who was a classical violinist. And Dr. Barnwell herself studied violin for 15 years, beginning at the age of 2.5. Wow. With this background, she went on to earn a Bachelor and Master's of Science degrees in speech pathology and a Doctor of Philosophy in speech pathology. And the Masters of Science in Public Health from Howard University. Oh my goodness. But most of us know her from her wonderful work and career with Sweet Honey in the Rock. And tonight she's going to educate us. I'm going to say edutain us, just with your wonderful personality, of course. And teach us a little bit more about Black music. So without further ado, I just want to...
Thank you. use this microphone or the one over here?
He's gonna like you.
It's your preference.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Just prepared to get set up here. When we got to the work of Lorenzo Return, it turned me on. And it sort of sustained me all through the arguments around sociolinguistics and what was going on in Black English. And so it really is an honor. This is maybe my Sweet Honey has performed here a couple of times. I came down to visit my father's cousin, my cousin, Avery's father. Some of you may have known her. And that was maybe 3 years before she passed. And I really want to thank Dr. Ysaye and the staff of this amazing institution that come here and research who you are. I would invite you to take every opportunity to do that because this really is a jewel. And I can't say enough about Paul Barberini, who showed up at one of my workshops and we talked briefly, and I must have said something about Charleston, and from that point on, he was on, and now I'm on. So I want to thank you, Paul, very, very much, and I want to thank all of the staff of this amazing institution. Kumbaya, mala kumbaya. Kumbaya, mala kumbaya, ya, ya, ya. Kumbaya, mala kumbaya, hola, kumbaya, hola, kumbaya, hola, kumbaya, kumbaya. People need you like kumbaya. People need you like kumbaya, ya, ya, ya. People need you like kumbaya, hola, kumbaya, hola, kumbaya, hola, kumbaya, kumbaya. I am reclaiming that song. I've taken it back from all the liberals who are saying, oh, it was a kumbaya moment. I'm taking it back. My understanding is that it is an invocation, not a sanction for a moment that makes us all feel good. And I started singing it that way when I was a member of Sweet Honey in the Rock. Some of you may know that I actually retired at the end of May, and that gives me more time to do some of my own things. And perhaps at the end of this, I'll tell you a little bit more about what some of my own things are. But I want to begin this evening by reading 2 quotes, if I can, and then talking a little bit about worldview. And I want to ask you to just think a little bit about the difference between worldview and a view of the world. And if we can come to some general, basic understanding of the difference between those 2 things, then I'd like to talk about an African worldview of music and why and how we have evolved from African music to today. Pretty much. The first quote is from a European classical musician, composer, and he says, one thing that we can be certain of is that we do not compose, sing, or play music for any useful purpose. Music is just music, and that is, to my mind, its great joy. The other is by an African drummer. His name is Ysaye. And he says music was created not only for pleasing the ear, it must have a meaning, express an activity, a natural or supernatural force, a feeling. Without meaning, it loses its reason for being. Two diametrically opposed views of the purpose, if there is one, of music. I would hasten to say that in an African worldview, music cannot exist without a reason. It cannot exist for no reason. Two different views of the world right now. I'm looking at you and how gorgeous you are, and I'm looking at the artwork behind. There are some windows, some are closed in terms of the shutters, and some are open, and I see the trees beyond and the sky, and y'all are looking at me, and I'm so sad. But there are other things up here. That is your view of the world, and this is my view of the world. But you have a number of rhythms that are all intersecting, all operating together. And it's astounding to really understand how that works. There is a kind of listening that has to happen that doesn't happen in Western music. That listening is listening for something as well as to something. You are listening to what the rhythms that are around you are playing, and you are forming those relationships. But really, what people are ultimately listening for are the melodies that are created when all those rhythms come together. That's the reason rhythm, very often, in some eyes, is more important than melody. Because once the rhythm is established, melody gets created by the interaction of all of those rhythms. The drum, as important as it is not necessary. We know that because we use it here. When the drum was taken away, we found other ways to drum. We found ways of drumming with our hands, with our feet. And so what we understand is that it is rhythm that is ultimately one of the most important things. And when we tie that to everything in nature, we understand that rhythm has to exist. And that there is a rhythm to the sun rising and setting, there is a rhythm to the moon, there is a rhythm to how we breathe. Rhythm is essential. Except in some worldviews, rhythm is not seen. Melody is seen as more important. But I think people don't understand all the ways that melody is created. If at any point you don't understand, please stop. And I will try to explain. So we look at function, we look at rhythm, we look at call and response. We look at the fact that African music is very repetitive. Repetition doesn't mean that it's the same every time it goes around. It just means it keeps going around and comes back to a starting point and goes again, and goes again, and goes again. And it can have variations every time. But there's another element to that, and that is each time it goes around, it becomes a little more intense. And so it heats up. And things happen when it heats up. It is when you have repeated it enough times for something to happen that you have created the energy that you're looking for. That the baby gets fed, that the food has cooked, that we have a summoning of our sacred and spiritual entities who come and visit either inside of us or through us, and that we have a level of communication that is very, very different than if we had not repeated ourselves again and again and again. Repetition is very healing. Repetition allows people to move outside of their personal selves into another realm where we don't have to process in the same way, where we can allow other forces to take control if that is the intention. So repetition is very important. And you won't know if you've seen circle dances, if you've seen shouts, you understand the power of repetition. It's essential. It is essential. And so when we look at repetition, we look at it a little bit differently. I say, with call and response, if a person doesn't understand the message, then you have to repeat it. But you don't repeat it the same way because you know they didn't get it the first time. So you have to say it a little bit differently. And when you do that, in fact, you are implementing what we know of as improvisation. We are finding a new way to say what we said before because we are trying to be clear. We are trying to be understood. We are trying to make something happen. And the way in which we do that is by repeating it until we see from the response that people have understood, or until we know that an energy has been created, which is the energy we need to move forward. Call and response and repetition are very, very important. We have to use them. There are a number of other of the things that we need to be fully involved. And much of that has to do with how we view the world and how we operate in the world. Which is why, if we understand the need to document who we are, then we understand that in the process of becoming on these shores, we had to at every point document who we are. We had to reinforce our experiences. We had to have a way of communicating with people who had been gathered from all over the continent of Africa and brought to the west coast of Africa and then put on ships. We were laying spoon fashion next to people who may not have spoken our own language, although we may have looked very much like them. But when we talk about an African world, we understand that even if the religions were different, even if the languages were different, there was a commonality of this larger picture. And that was very, very important. So here we are. We wind up on one of these shores. And there are needs that need to be communicated. There are things that need to be done so that we can survive. And how do we go through that process? One of the things that I began to think about, and my good friend Elise Davis, my father, we were in school together. And part of what we studied was linguistics. And because of that, I began, years after that experience, to think about our experience on this continent in terms of the linguistic development that had to take place. People think that we arrived here singing spirituals in English. Right? There were spirituals. There have always been spirituals. Well, no. No, not exactly. And so I actually think about how long did it take before we began to develop this body of song, which I define spirituals as the entire body of song created during the period of enslavement. Talk after me and say, I challenge that, it's fine. I like the conversation. But I think that in the course of our work life, there must have been master drummers, because they were the ones who understood timing. There must have been master drummers who set the pace of work so that we were not dead or killed at the end of the day. Where we get work songs is from someone setting the pace of how fast the work should go. And early work songs have one-word calls and one-word responses. And then the calls become more complicated. They become full sentences. But the response may still have been a one-word response until the whole community began to increase their vocabularies and respond to more complicated responses. And at what point do we get to the flowered poetry that we hear in My Lord, What a Morning? When do we get to that? It didn't happen instantly. It emerged slowly but surely as we became more sophisticated with our knowledge of the language here and how we could apply that language. I'm always curious about the spirituals that talk about people in the Old Testament. First of all, I still don't quite understand how come missionaries or preachers decided to teach the Old Testament to enslaved Africans rather than the New Testament. And I ask you this because you all know all these stories in the Bible about these people who overcame. They were all in the Old Testament. Jonah, Moses, oh my goodness, David, Daniel, Joshua, they all overcame. Now, in a lot of particularly West African religions, there are a realm of sacred beings that we refer to as orishas. Every one of those orishas has their own song, their own dance, their own rhythm, their own color, their own food. They have their own. And we did something very interesting here that I've not heard anybody else talk about, but I've been thinking about it for a long time. For each one of those people in the Old Testament of the Bible who overcame, and they surely did, we have a song. We revered them in the same way we revered those sacred entities. Oshun, Obatala, all of those sacred entities have their own song, rhythm, dance, all of them. And we have spirituals for Joshua and Moses and David and Elijah. All of them have their own song because of how they overcame. We have something that happened here that didn't happen in the Caribbean and in South America, where they did not take the drum away. They preserved some of the rhythms that, in fact, they traveled here with. But because the drum was taken away, we had to do some other things rhythmically. I had a project where I was composing a piece with a Venezuelan composer. And she came to Washington, D.C. because she wanted to know about spirituals and I wanted to know about Venezuelan religions. Here's a rhythm that she taught me. It was called Sangeo. And the basic rhythm is this. Pa-pa, 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 pa-pa. Pa-pa, 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 pa-pa. Can I ask you all to do that? Pa-pa, 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 pa-pa. That's your rhythm, okay? Here we go. Pa-pa, 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 Have any of you ever heard that rhythm before? No? Anybody know the spiritual? I know the Lord is with us. That's what I'm saying. You got it. You got it. How's it go? I know the Lord. I know the Lord. I know the Lord is hands on me. Oh, I know the Lord. I know the Lord. I know the Lord is his hands on me. It's the exact rhythm. She's never heard that spirit. And I've never heard that rhythm played on the drum. So I have begun to wonder, anybody that looking for a doctoral dissertation? I got something for you. What I want to know is, did we encode our rhythms into our songs?
I shall.
That's what I want to know. And I keep thinking about how we can study this, because we'll have to collect 1,000 or more rhythms, I know, and then we'll have to start looking at all of these spirituals, to see how and where they pair up. That was just one clue for me. Just one clue. And that's where a lot of this research comes from. Just one clue. Are there other examples? And I'm looking. I am looking. Okay? So, where our music comes from, what our music does, is very important. So we have spirituals that talk about these people in the Old Testament and the Bible. We have spirituals that talk about what it felt like to have been enslaved. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. We know these songs. We also have spirituals that tell us things that we've forgotten we knew. Let me tell you one. Let us pray together on our knees. Everybody knows that? Keep going.
Let us break bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees, with my face to the rising sun.
Stop. What did we just say? When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun. What does that suggest?
To the east.
Sun rising in the east. What else? What does that mean?
Sun God, sun worship.
Sun worship and or Islam. Islam. Did we know that we were putting that into this song? Are there other songs that give us similar clues to what our past experience was? We have to study this. We have to analyze these lyrics because we were having some conversations that we've forgotten we were having. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. This is deep stuff. And so I have this like amazing collection of all these books of lyrics that I keep going through. I'm trying to understand what our documentation is telling us. I'm trying to understand it because our music had purpose. We created that music so that we could remind ourselves of what our experience had been. We created that music so that we could have conversations about how we were going to change our experience. How do we get someplace else? How do we travel? How do we document being sold and taken from one place to another place? We know where people went because we listen to how they sing and where the melodies are the same but the words are different, or where the words are the same but the melody is different, gives us some clues about migration, even under our enslavement. And so we have to look at how those things evolved. It's really critical. It's really important, and it's fun to think about. It's a lot of fun to think about. So, in terms of spirituals, just spirituals, when we look at all of the different kinds of songs that evolved during our period of enslavement, there's a vast amount of music. Do you know that the Library of Congress has over 6,000 spirituals? This is amazing because they were all in the oral tradition, which means, somebody could create one tonight and it'll be forgotten tomorrow. And we've gone on to creating something else. So the fact that there have been 6,000 that have been cataloged in somewhere is really quite amazing. There's a wonderful book called African American Lyrics. I think it's called African American Lyrics, and it looks at just lyrics. And it documents where sets of lyrics were found so that you can see where the variants went. And that's really important. We need to do that with melodies as well, so we can see where the melodies went. We need to do it with rhythm, so we can see where the rhythms went. That kind of analysis, I think, is very, very important to understanding how our music evolved during the period of enslavement. When we look at Reconstruction, the period of Reconstruction, we begin to see another kind of musics evolving. When we talk about the blues, really blues is a music of migration, of people leaving their community where the community did everything together, to people now leaving home and traveling by themselves and beginning to describe, I'm going to Chicago and I'm real sorry I can't take you. That's blues, sure enough. And it's telling you where they're going. They're saying to you, I no longer have my community and I'm doing this on my own. So we need to look at the blues. We need to look at where the blues tells us people went, what communities they left, how they began to establish relationships that were different from the ones they had before. When we look at jazz, we see influences coming together that hadn't come together in music before. We see African influences coming together with Spanish and French and all other kinds of things down there in New Orleans where they had the drum. It was the only place they had the drum. Thursdays in Congo Square, they could play the drum. They had some other things happen. They picked up instruments that were left by the soldiers, and they began to play and make new music. That music migrated. All of it migrated to the big cities. And when it did, a number of things started to happen. One of the most dangerous, I think, was the aspect of commodification. Music became a commodity. And at that point, the function changed radically. I just came from a conference a couple of months ago where people were looking at gospel music and saying, gospel music isn't political. Right? It's not, because it's evolved to something else. And it has been co-opted by commodification. But the music that we hear on the radio is not the same as the music we hear in church. And they didn't observe that. What we sing in church is still real. What you hear on the radio, and I'm not going to mention names, but you know who I'm talking about, that's commodification. And that changes the function, radically changes the function of that music. And then we get to the music of the Civil Rights Movement, where we see the evolution of music being employed in the music of struggle. Well, it was always a music of struggle. We just put it into a modern context, and so we have how many songs that came forward in the Civil Rights Movement where maybe one word needed to be changed. I remember Bernice Regan saying, the first time she ever sang and somebody said, you know, sing X, and she started singing that song, and she realized that one word in that song wasn't appropriate for the situation. And so she changed that word to reflect the struggle. And it was the first time she ever had that experience of making a change in a traditional song. But she understood why she had to do it, because she was trying to be appropriate in that situation. I have this conversation often because I find that a lot of people don't understand cultural appropriation. They change the words whenever they feel like it, without understanding what the true meaning, the true original intention and meaning of the words are. And therefore, there's little regard for what happens when you change the words. I'll give you an example. Some years ago, Sweet Honey participated in documenting, or doing a kind of documentary of the song We Shall Overcome. And the Slick Freedom Singers came, and Sweet Honey was there, and Pete Seeger was there, and one or two other people who had been involved in the struggle in the music. And Pete Seeger sang, We're Climbing Jacob's Ladder. And everybody in the whole congregation, which was primarily a black audience, sang, We are climbing Jacob's ladder. And then he sang, "We are dancing Sarah's circle." And people stopped singing. They didn't know what he was saying. Where did that come from? It did not come from the community. And because it did not come from the community, people didn't know what it meant. Why is that there? Well, you know, I understand heat seekers wanting to do the gender equality thing. You got Jacob climbing, you might as well have Sarah dancing. Except that doesn't always work. That is a kind of cultural and political appropriation that makes the creator in the moment feel better. But it's not appropriate all the time. And so we have to look at that. We have to understand it. We have to understand why that did not work. That is not in the documentary, believe me. Maybe the first part is, but the second, I mean, people really just stop singing. Like, what? So, understanding the music. I've gotten into a lot of conversations. Here's one other example. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. There are people who are uncomfortable with saying steal away to Jesus. And I say to them, if you don't understand what Jesus meant, then you won't understand why you don't even have to change the word. If you understand that Jesus was always a way of discussing freedom, then there's no need to change the word to steal away to freedom. If you understood that people who create polyrhythms also create poly-meanings. You all understand what I'm saying? That is part of the world view, that you can have several things going on at the same time that represent sometimes very disparate kinds of phenomena. So if you understand that, then it's a little easier to understand that even though Jesus might not be your thing, freedom might, and freedom and Jesus might actually be the same. But you have to know that. If you don't know it, you make some gross mistakes sometimes. So I wanted to just kind of present to you an evolution of the music from an African worldview, so that you have a slightly different way of approaching this music, if in fact you do. So that you have maybe a slightly different understanding of the fact that purpose and function are critical for those who actually come out of an African worldview. It may not be so for those who come out of a Western point of view. Many of us now have gotten deeply involved in the Western perspective. And so things are beginning to change in ways that I sometimes wish they would not change, but they are. Because that's part of the progress, I guess. Put a question mark at the end of it. I'm going to sit here and kind of have a dialogue if you'd like to.
You're right here. Nowadays, roots music is something else. So I'm not changing my roots. My roots music was African rhythm music. And I continue to play reggae so because it's related to juju, highlight, salsa, blues, R&B, and jazz. It's all kind of come from the same root. So I think that, thank you for the compliment. And for those of you who need a reminder, every Saturday night from 10 to 11.
Yes.
Could you give us some ideas in terms of the linkage African music with the current rap music?
Yes. First of all, when I talked about rhythm and how important it is, rap music is all about rhythm. It really is. there is a rhythm, and it's really interesting because that rhythm, the beats, as they're called, is all over the world. The whole world has accepted those beats as the current sound. So whether you're hearing rap music in Zaire, or in France, or in Somalia, or in Cuba, you're hearing the same beats. It's amazing to me how that's working. The recitation that goes on top of the beats is rhythm. We're talking polyrhythms to the max. We really are. They're polyrhythms to the max. So we have not lost that. We also have not lost the aspect of documentation in the lyric. Now, whether or not you like what's being documented or the form of the documentation is a whole nother discussion. But rap is about documentation. The hip-hop world is broader than rap. Just for those of you who may not be aware of this, the hip-hop world is not only the rap, it is the movement or the dance, it is graffiti, it is the wardrobe, the dress, what people are wearing. It looks the same all over the world. I am blown away by how powerful hip-hop is and how we have influenced the entire world with these beats, these rhythms, this dress, graffiti, the colors, the clothing. It's amazing. It's a very powerful thing. What is, I think, unfortunate is that what is commercial is frequently very negative. That disturbs me. But that is not all that exists. We just have to look a little harder to find what's possible. I hope that helps. Yes, sorry.
Do you think in the African music the precursors that are experienced was struggle and pain, or was it different? Was there a long-term history of struggle and pain? Did it continue here, or did it develop?
I don't think struggle and pain were the only themes.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
But I certainly feel like what we went through in the encampments on the coast of West Africa, and what we went through on the journey to these shores, and what we encountered when we arrived here, there was certainly struggle and pain. There was probably little else to talk about. So I don't think that struggle and pain was the only thing that we've ever sung. I feel like it was such an enormous part of the experience that we had during that year, that we had to sort that out. But I don't feel like that was the only thing. I feel like we had to work. We were working to work. We worked, and we sang about the work we did. We sang so we could do the work we did. We sang so that we could survive the work we did. And every other aspect of life went on. I'm sure that there were good times. There are lots of songs that wind up in the body of spirituals that are fun songs, you know. And people had to entertain themselves, had to de-stress in many, many ways. And so I think that the music reflects that. What we tend to focus on during that period of slavery is the pain and the suffering and the endurance. But that wasn't all that existed. I think all aspects of life activity were documented in this movie. I have a friend who kind of categorized the areas of life activity, and I long ago, when I was listening to him talk all the time, memorize it: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, sex, religion, politics, and war. All of those things. We sang about all of those things and documented all of those things. So I think it wasn't just the struggle. Yeah.
You say, we know that many of the slaves who were brought to America spent time in the Caribbean islands as well as some of the South American coastal areas. Mm-hmm. Do you see influences of that experience in African American music?
Yes and no. Because I think that people who went to other regions of the Americas had maybe some different experiences, and some of that may be that, one, they were allowed to keep their drums. Number two, that there was Catholicism in those islands. That was a major difference because Catholic saints kind of look like Orishas.
I say, every day, all day.
That's what I'm saying?
I say.
So they could practice their traditional religions under the guise of Catholicism. And they maintained the rhythms that they had in order to do that. We had a total separation from that. There were no saints up in here. And so when we tried to maintain, we adopted, like I said before, some of those, or most of those Old Testament figures that we assigned that responsibility to, and we related to them. So I think that that there were differences for even those two reasons, if no other reasons, and I'm sure that there were other reasons as well. Anybody else? You have a question? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't scare you. Anybody else? Yes.
Would you say that there are some spirituals that actually originated in this area? We get into the thing about
that originated where?
In this area.
Oh, of course.
But could you name? We always are hearing "We shall overcome" is from this area, and then we get people that say no, it's not.
Name some.
Yeah, name some.
Lord,
Michael wrote a book.
Michael wrote a book. Yes, absolutely. Yonder come day. Oh, day, yonder come day. Oh, day, yonder come day. Oh, day, yonder come day. Yonder come day. Day done broke in my soul. Yonder come day. Oh my God. Now there are so many. I don't know where to start right at this moment.
How about Kumbaya?
Kumbaya? Well, thank you. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Even the form of the words. Kumbaya, come by here. Yes. Huh?
I just said, in my approximation of color, Kumbaya.
Kumbaya, come by here. There are different ways of singing even that one song.
So "We shall overcome" comes up all the time with people.
I know.
And they'll say it came from John's Island and it was "I shall overcome."
Yes, and it was used in the struggle with the hospital workers.
Yes, it was.
Before that,
It was a cigar factory.
I said it was used there, but it evolved. So yes.
It was.
I mean, I think that one comes up because, we all sing a form of it now. Okay? And it was "I'll overcome." It was "I'll overcome." Black folk never would have said "I shall overcome." We shall overcome. I don't even know if we had "shall" in our vocabulary. I really don't know if we had it in our vocabulary. So it was changed. And you know who to attribute the change to because he claims it all the time. And that's Pete Seeger.
What would you have to say through the earned degrees that you worked your butt off for, the honorary degrees, the travels with Sweet Honey in the Rock? Is there just one moment that no matter what, every now and then it just slaps you upside the head and humbles you?
Wow. Life does that to you every 5 minutes.
Oh, she got it.
Do you have a Swahili way, Gonzayaba? Do you know where that comes from?
I don't. I've not heard it before. What is it? Would you like to sing it?
I can sure.
Okay, sure. I have not heard it before. help you with the derivation at all. I don't know the language. I don't know what's close to that language.
Right.
Where did you learn it?
High school, I was in chorus, and I had a teacher who would always teach us like the Lion King. You know how it's like yeah. We used to learn all of those, and we used to learn Swahili spirituals, and that was the one that I just remembered because it was.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yes. Thank you for sharing it with us. I wish I could help you with it.
I'll probably just call her.
Talk to her.
Yeah.
Tell her you want to know more about it. That's very important. Very important.
I don't have a question, but there's something I want to share. I don't know whether you remember, but several years ago, I looked online, got your email address, and contacted you because I was about to do about 4 or 5 places in the country and in France, and our instructions, there were about 50 pieces. But we had to, it would hang like this, and so you had to have the instructions.
Right.
And I say here that the lyrics of We Are, written by Dr. Ysaye Barnwell, answered the question for me and many others about who we are. And it has your chorus.
Could you please just come up?
Take it.
Turn it around so everybody can see it. Turn it around.
You see your lyrics. We are our grandmothers.
Wow. Wow. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreams. We are the breath of
Their ancestors, and
we are the spirit of God. Thank you. And I see that on the back there are feet.
Yes.
There are feet in motion. Thank you. Can you, I want to look at it more closely.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know what time it is. I do know, excuse me.
Oh, okay.
I think Paul might have told me about it, yes, and so it involves a requiem that I wrote for the bones of the slave that have not been buried. They're going to be buried September the 12th. He died in 1798.
Until Friday.
Connecticut. That's where he was enslaved, and that's where he died. In Waterbury, Connecticut.
I'm going to Waterbury, but not till the 27th.
No.
I'm going to a wedding. What's more timing? Maybe I can ask her to step away.
Well, you can just go and hang out. Go and hang out.
Can you tell me where the burial is going to be?
Yes, it's going to be at the St. John's Episcopal Church where he was baptized in 1797. Let me just tell you briefly what happened. He and his wife and kids were owned by a doctor. When Fortune died, the doctor used his body as a medical specimen. Dissected the body, spoiled all the soft tissue off, and kept the bones. And he taught bone setting until the bone stayed in the family until 1930. Okay? And, and then they gave the bones to the Mattertock Museum in Waterbury. That's where they are. Okay. They hung on display, fully articulated, for over 40 years. So everybody who went to the museum saw Fortune hanging there, except somebody wrote Larry across his forehead. Larry. Something disconnected from his name and who he was. And then the black community began to rediscover who he was. And told the museum they needed to take the statues. So they did that, but the bones are still in the museum. Okay. So somehow or other now, the bones have been scanned as they commissioned a poem about Fortune's life, which was written by a black sister who was the poet laureate of the state of Connecticut in 2000. She published that in 2005. In 2009, I was commissioned to set that poem. So we did it in Waterbury.
I just did it as a curated year-long project at the University of Maryland.
I'm going to get my cards out.
Okay, all righty. When we did it at Maryland, I had full orchestra, 200 black voices in the choir, 8 soloists, African drum ensemble, and we had public discussions for a year about all the issues. And so now that project, I like this. Yeah, I've trademarked the name of the project, I've designed how it works, and so the performance for all that is the required part. And you know, I conduct choirs, exam consider sometimes. They ask me if I want to